The cold metal of the handcuffs bit into my wrists as the officer guided me out of the patrol car. Not arrested, escorted. Protected, they said. Through the glass doors of Peterson's funeral home on 5th Street, I could see them all gathered. My family, mourners in black. And somewhere in that building, supposedly, lay my son Glenn in a casket I'd never been allowed to see alone. The officer's hand was firm on my elbow, and I remember thinking how strange it was that I needed police protection at my own child's funeral. But that metallic taste in my mouth, that wasn't grief anymore. It was something sharper. 3 months earlier, I thought I knew who I was. I lived in a modest 2-story house in Phoenix, the kind with a front porch where the paint peels just enough to remind you it's lived in. My name is Margaret, though everyone calls me Maggie, and at 68 years old, I'd built what I thought was a good life. Glenn was my only child, 39 years old, working as an accountant in what I believed was Denver. We talked every Sunday, or at least we used to. The calls had gotten shorter over the past year, his voice always hurried, always apologetic. I told myself he was busy. Successful people are busy, right? That's what you tell yourself when the alternative is too painful to consider. Looking back now, I can pinpoint the exact moment when things started to shift, though I didn't recognize it at the time. It was last October, a Tuesday afternoon when the Arizona heat was finally breaking into something bearable. I'd tried calling Glenn on his cell, not our usual Sunday, but I'd found his favorite childhood book while cleaning the attic and wanted to tell him about it. The number went straight to a recording. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." I figured he'd changed carriers, maybe got a better deal. I left it alone, waited for Sunday. When Sunday came and my phone rang, I was so relieved I didn't even question why the caller ID showed unknown number instead of his name. "Hey, Mom," he'd said, but something in his voice was off, distant, like he was reading from a script. We talked for maybe 8 minutes, a record low, and when I asked for his new number, he said he'd text it to me. He never did. I told myself I'd ask again next week. Then next week became next month, and the calls kept coming from unknown numbers, and I kept not asking because part of me was afraid of what his hesitation might mean. Was I becoming a burden? Was he pulling away? These thoughts ate at me in the quiet hours, in the space between waking and sleeping when your mind turns traitor. My sister Carol had always been the organized one, the one who remembered birthdays, who kept the family together after our parents died. She lived just 20 minutes away in Scottsdale, in one of those gated communities where everything is beige and perfect. When she started coming by more often last fall, I was grateful. She'd bring groceries, help me sort through mail, remind me about doctor appointments I'd supposedly forgotten. She had this way of making me feel like I was slipping, like my mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. And maybe I believed her because it was easier than admitting I was lonely. I remember the first time she suggested I was forgetting things. It was a Wednesday morning, early November. She'd stopped by with coffee, my favorite vanilla latte from the shop on Indian School Road, and found me looking through my address book. "Who are you trying to call?" she asked, setting the coffee on my kitchen table. The ceramic made a small click against the wood, a sound I can still hear perfectly. "Janet Morehouse," I said. "We had plans for lunch today, and I wanted to confirm the time." Carol's face did something subtle, a micro-expression I'd later recognize as calculated pity. "Mom had a friend named Janet," she said carefully. "But Maggie, you don't. At least, not that I know of. Are you feeling okay?" I stared at her. Janet Morehouse. We'd taught together for 15 years. We'd gone to wine tastings and book clubs and commiserated about difficult parents at parent-teacher conferences. I had memories of Janet so vivid I could smell her jasmine perfume. But Carol's concern was so genuine, her confusion so real, that I felt something shift inside me. A small seed of doubt. I must be thinking of someone else, I'd said, though even as the words left my mouth, I knew I wasn't. Carol had reached across the table and squeezed my hand. "It's okay. These things happen. Stress can make our minds play tricks on us. When was the last time you saw Dr. Patterson?" Dr. Patterson was my general practitioner, and I'd seen her just 2 months before for my annual checkup. Everything had been fine, but I made an appointment anyway because Carol had planted the seed and it was growing roots. Looking back, I realize now that Janet Morehouse did exist. She'd moved to Tucson 3 years ago, and we'd fallen out of touch. Carol had simply exploited a natural memory gap to make me question myself. It was brilliant. It was evil. It worked. The first real crack appeared on a Tuesday. I'd been looking for my checkbook. I always kept it in the 3rd drawer of my desk, always, and it wasn't there. I tore the house apart. When Carol found me sitting on the floor of my study, surrounded by papers, she didn't ask what I was looking for. She just smiled this patient smile and said, "Mom used to do this too, you know," toward the end. Our mother had died of Alzheimer's. The implication hung in the air like smoke. I let her help me up. I let her put the papers back. I let her take control of my life in small, imperceptible ways because somewhere deep down, I was starting to believe I needed her to. What I didn't know, what I wouldn't discover until months later, was that Carol had taken my checkbook herself during one of her earlier visits. She'd slipped it into her purse while I was in the bathroom, a casual theft that served a dual purpose. It gave her access to my checking account, and it gave her ammunition to prove I was losing my mental faculties. The checkbook would turn up weeks later in my linen closet, a place I'd never have put it. "See?" Carol had said, finding it there with me watching. "You put it away and forgot. It happens, Maggie. It's nothing to be ashamed of." Except I hadn't put it there. She had. But how do you prove something like that? How do you prove a negative? You can't, and that's exactly what predators like Carol count on. Then came the phone call that split my world in half. It was a Saturday morning, 8:42 exactly. I remember because I was watching the clock, waiting for Glenn's usual Sunday call a day early if I was lucky. But it wasn't Glenn's number on my screen. It was an Arizona area code I didn't recognize. The voice on the other end was professionally distant, the kind of tone they must teach in police academy. "Mrs. Patterson, this is Officer Rodriguez with Denver PD. I'm calling about your son, Glenn Patterson." My heart stopped before he even finished. "I'm very sorry to inform you that your son was involved in a fatal car accident last night. He passed away at the scene." The thing about shock is that it doesn't feel like they show it in movies. It's not dramatic, it's just empty. I remember the phone slipping from my hand. I remember the sound it made hitting the hardwood floor. I remember Carol appearing at my door within 20 minutes. Too quickly, now that I think about it, and wrapping her arms around me while I couldn't cry because crying would make it real. I don't remember calling Carol. That's the part that haunts me now. I don't remember picking up the phone, dialing her number, telling her Glenn was dead. But she was there, in my living room, holding me while I shook. "I came as soon as I heard," she kept saying, "as soon as I heard." But heard from whom? I couldn't have called her. I was on the floor. The phone was 3 feet away where it had fallen. The screen was cracked from the impact. Later, much later, I'd understand that Officer Rodriguez was likely a friend of Carol's, someone she'd paid or convinced to make that call. The Denver Police Department had no record of contacting me about Glenn's death because Glenn hadn't died. But in that moment, in that Saturday morning that turned my world inside out, I had no reason to question it. Why would I? You don't expect your sister to fake your son's death. That's not a thing normal people do. But Carol wasn't normal, and I was about to learn exactly how abnormal she could be. She handled everything. The arrangements, the phone calls, the paperwork that needed signing. I signed whatever she put in front of me because what else was I supposed to do? My son was dead, and the bureaucracy of death doesn't stop for grief. She showed me a death certificate, official looking, with stamps and signatures. She showed me paperwork from a Denver hospital. She showed me an invoice from the coroner's office, all of it fake, all of it meticulously crafted to look real because Carol had been planning this for longer than I wanted to imagine. "They're transporting his body back to Phoenix," she told me that first day, sitting on my couch with her hand on my knee. "It'll take a few days. The funeral home here will handle everything once he arrives. You don't need to worry about any of it. I've got you." I'd nodded, mute with grief. I'd let her take my hand and squeeze it. I'd let her become the strong one because I was shattered glass held together by nothing but shock. And every time I let her handle something, every time I signed something without reading it, every time I trusted her to make a decision for me, I was handing her another piece of my life to steal. Looking back now, the metallic taste returns when I think about how smoothly it all went. How Carol had answers for every question before I could ask it. How she'd already contacted a funeral home in Phoenix for the service because it's too far for people to travel to Denver. How she'd arranged for Glenn's body to be transported back. How she'd filed the death certificate and started the process for settling his estate. My son's estate, which apparently needed settling immediately. I was numb to it all. Research I came across later would tell me that nearly 5 million seniors experience some form of abuse annually in this country, and that prosecuting these cases almost never happens because the victims don't even realize they're victims. I was so deep in grief that I couldn't see the manipulation happening right in front of me. The days after that phone call blurred together. Carol was at my house constantly, sometimes staying overnight in the guest room to make sure I was okay. She'd wake me up in the morning with coffee and sympathy. She'd remind me to eat, to shower, to take the sleeping pills my doctor had prescribed. Except I hadn't been to my doctor. Carol had gotten those pills from somewhere, put them in an orange prescription bottle with my name on it, and I'd taken them without question. They made me foggy, compliant, easier to manage. I realize now they were probably something stronger than sleep aids, something that kept me docile while she systematically dismantled my life. You're probably screaming at your screen right now, telling me how obvious it all seems. But grief doesn't make you sharp. It makes you soft and vulnerable and willing to let other people carry the weight because you can't bear it yourself. I spent 3 weeks in a fog. Carol brought me meals I didn't eat. She sorted through Glenn's belongings that had been shipped from his apartment, clothes and books and random items that I couldn't bring myself to touch. She convinced me to sign a power of attorney, just in case something happened to me during this stressful time. She even had a notary come to the house. I signed it. God help me. I signed it because she was my sister, and I trusted her, and I couldn't think straight enough to question why it was necessary. The notary was a woman named Patricia, probably in her 50s, with kind eyes and a professional manner. She'd explained the document to me, or seemed to. I remember her voice washing over me like water. Words about fiduciary duty and revocable authority and acting in my best interests. I remember Carol nodding along, her hand on my shoulder. I remember thinking how lucky I was to have a sister who cared enough to make sure I was protected. I remember signing my name on the line. The pen was heavy in my hand. My signature looked strange, shaky and uncertain, not like my usual confident script. Patricia had witnessed it, added her own signature and seal, and just like that, I'd given Carol legal control over my finances, my healthcare decisions, my entire life. The document was dated 2 weeks after Glenn's supposed death. 2 weeks was all it took for Carol to convince me I needed a keeper. 2 weeks to transform me from an independent woman into a dependent ward. The funeral was scheduled for a Saturday, 3 weeks after the phone call. Carol insisted on a closed casket, citing the nature of the accident, the condition of the body, all these details that made my stomach turn. I didn't fight it. Who wants to remember their child that way? The service would be at Peterson's, the same funeral home where we'd held my mother's service 4 years earlier. Carol handled the guest list, the flowers, the music. She kept saying she wanted to spare me the burden. I let her because I was drowning, and she was the only one throwing me a rope. Except the rope was actually an anchor. In those 3 weeks between the phone call and the funeral, I started deteriorating. Not naturally, I understand that now, but because Carol was ensuring it. She'd increased my medication, telling me the doctor had called in a stronger prescription. She'd started controlling what I ate, bringing me meals that left me feeling more tired, more confused. She'd disconnected my landline, saying there was a billing issue that she'd handle. She'd changed my email password, claiming my account had been hacked, and she was protecting me. Piece by piece, she was cutting me off from the outside world, isolating me in a prison of grief and dependency that she'd constructed with meticulous care. Here's something nobody tells you about grief. It makes you doubt everything you thought you knew about yourself. I started forgetting things, real things this time, not Carol's invented lapses. I'd lose track of time, find myself standing in rooms with no memory of why I'd gone there. I stopped showering regularly. I stopped answering the phone when neighbors called. I existed in this gray space where nothing mattered because the one person who'd mattered most was gone. And Carol? She was there for all of it, documenting it, I realize now. Taking photos of my unwashed dishes, my unopened mail, my decline, building a case I didn't know existed. One afternoon, about 10 days before the funeral, my neighbor Mrs. Chen knocked on the door. She was a sweet woman, 72, who'd lived next door for 6 years. We'd shared recipes and gardening tips and the occasional glass of wine on summer evenings. She'd heard about Glenn. Carol had made sure the news spread through the neighborhood and wanted to offer her condolences. Carol answered the door before I could even get up from the couch. "I'm sorry. Margaret isn't feeling up to visitors right now," Carol said, her voice a perfect blend of regret and protectiveness. "The grief has been very hard on her. I'm sure you understand." Through the gap in the door, I could see Mrs. Chen's concerned face. "Of course. I just wanted her to know I'm thinking of her. Please tell her." "I will," Carol said, already closing the door. "Thank you for stopping by." I should have gotten up. I should have called out, told Mrs. Chen I wanted to see her. But the medication made me slow, made my tongue thick. By the time I'd formed the thought to speak, the door was closed and Mrs. Chen was gone. Carol turned back to me with that patient smile. "You need your rest, Maggie. All these visitors would just exhaust you." But Mrs. Chen was the only visitor who'd tried to come. Carol had intercepted the others, I'd learn later. She told them I wasn't accepting visitors, that I was too fragile, that they should give me space. She'd collected their cards and flowers and casseroles, accepting them at the door while I remained inside, isolated and unaware that my community was trying to reach me. The isolation was deliberate. It was strategic. It was abuse masquerading as care. There was one evening, about 2 weeks after the phone call, when I almost broke through the fog. I was sitting in Glenn's old bedroom. I'd gone in there to feel close to him, surrounded by the remnants of his childhood. His high school trophies on the shelf, the poster of his favorite band still tacked to the wall, the desk where he'd done his homework. Carol found me there, sitting on his bed, holding his old baseball mitt. "Maggie, you shouldn't torture yourself like this," she'd said gently, sitting down beside me. Her perfume was overwhelming in the small space, something expensive and cloying that made my head swim. "I just wanted to feel close to him," I'd whispered. "I keep thinking I should call him. Every time the phone rings, I think it's going to be him, telling me this was all a mistake." Carol had put her arm around my shoulders. "I know. Denial is part of the grieving process. It's completely normal." She'd paused, then added carefully, "You know, maybe we should pack some of this away. Having his things around might be making it harder for you to accept what's happened." Something in me recoiled. Pack away Glenn's things? Erase the evidence that he'd existed? "No," I'd said, more firmly than I'd spoken in days. "Not yet. I'm not ready." Carol's grip on my shoulder had tightened just slightly. Not enough to hurt, but enough to feel controlling. "Of course. Whenever you're ready. I'm just worried about you, that's all. You're spending so much time in here, living in the past. It's not healthy." But what was healthy about any of this? What was healthy about a world where my son was gone? I'd let her lead me out of the room, but I'd looked back at that baseball mitt on the bed, and some small part of me had screamed that something wasn't right. I'd ignored that voice. I wish I hadn't. The financial changes happened so gradually, I barely noticed. Carol would bring me documents to sign. "Just routine stuff," she'd say. "Nothing to worry about. Insurance forms, bank authorizations, legal papers that my grief-clouded brain couldn't process. I signed them all because she told me to, because I trusted her, because I didn't have the mental energy to question what they meant. One afternoon, my bank called. I'd answered before Carol could intercept. She'd been in the bathroom. "Mrs. Patterson, we're calling to confirm the wire transfer of $75,000 from your savings account. This is a large transaction, and we wanted to verify—" "I don't know anything about a wire transfer," I'd said, confusion cutting through the fog. There must be some mistake. The bank representative had paused. "The transfer was authorized by Carol Henderson, who has power of attorney on your account. She indicated this was for your medical expenses. If you'd like to stop the transaction—" Carol had appeared in the doorway, her face tight with concern. "Is that the bank? Let me handle it, Maggie. I forgot to tell you. Dr. Patterson's office needed payment for your upcoming treatments. Remember, we talked about this?" Had we talked about it? I couldn't remember. I couldn't remember anything clearly anymore. Carol had taken the phone from my hand, gently but firmly. "This is Carol Henderson. Yes, that transaction is authorized. My sister is confused. She's been having memory issues. That's actually what the medical expenses are for. Thank you for confirming." She'd hung up and smiled at me. "It's okay, Maggie. I've got everything under control. You don't need to worry about these things." But I hadn't felt reassured. I'd felt erased. That was the word that kept echoing in my head as I sat there, watching Carol delete the number from my call log so I couldn't call the bank back. Erased. Like I was being slowly removed from my own life, one signature, one phone call, one intercepted visitor at a time. The savings account I'd built over 30 years of teaching 4th grade, gone. Transferred to an account Carol said was safer for me. The investment portfolio my late husband had left me, repositioned into something Carol assured me was more appropriate for someone of my age and diminished capacity. She never used those exact words, but they hung there between us every time she smiled that patient smile. I was so lost in my grief that I didn't even notice I was being systematically erased from my own financial life. Nearly 1 in 10 Americans over 60 experiences elder abuse. I was becoming a statistic, and I was too broken to see it. But then came the wedding. Carol's youngest daughter, my niece Stephanie, was getting married. Big affair, country club reception, the works. Carol insisted I come, said it would be good for me to get out of the house, to be around family. I didn't want to go. The thought of putting on a dress and pretending to be happy felt impossible. But she wouldn't take no for an answer, and honestly, I didn't have the energy to fight her anymore. So I went, wearing a black dress because I couldn't bring myself to wear anything else, feeling like a ghost at a celebration of life. The preparation for the wedding was its own kind of torture. Carol came over the morning of to help me get ready, which meant she chose my outfit, did my makeup, styled my hair. I sat in front of my bathroom mirror like a doll being dressed, watching her transform me into something presentable. The woman in the mirror looked like me, but hollowed out, emptied. Carol kept up a stream of chatter about the wedding, the guest list, how beautiful the venue would be. I barely heard her. I was thinking about Glenn, about how he'd never get married, never have children, never grow old. Carol had stolen his future, though I didn't know it yet. She'd killed him in my mind so thoroughly that sitting there getting ready for a wedding felt like a betrayal of his memory. "You look beautiful," Carol said, stepping back to admire her work. She'd put color on my cheeks, liner around my eyes, gloss on my lips. I looked alive. I felt dead. "Stephanie will be so happy you're there. Family means everything, you know. Family means everything." The irony of those words coming from a woman who was destroying her family for profit would hit me later like a physical blow. But in that moment, I just nodded and let her lead me to the car. The ceremony was beautiful, I suppose. Stephanie looked radiant in her grandmother's lace, which Carol had altered without asking me if I wanted to be involved in that decision. But I'm not bitter about that, not compared to everything else. The reception was at Desert Hills Country Club, all white linens and string lights and champagne that tasted like nothing in my mouth. I sat at a table with distant cousins who kept giving me those sympathetic head tilts that made me want to disappear. I was counting the minutes until I could reasonably leave when I saw him. Carol's son, my nephew Derek, 24 years old, laughing with his new wife near the dance floor. He was wearing a suit that probably cost more than my mortgage payment. But that's not what caught my eye. It was the necklace. A simple silver chain with a small medallion. St. Christopher, patron saint of travelers. Glenn's necklace. The one his father had given him on his 16th birthday. The one he never took off, not even to shower. I'd last seen it when he visited 2 Christmases ago, catching the light as he hugged me goodbye. And now it was around Derek's neck, glinting under the reception lights like a confession. Time stopped. Everything around me, the music, the laughter, the clinking of glasses, faded to a dull roar. I could hear my heartbeat in my ears, a thunderous pounding that drowned out everything else. The necklace swung slightly as Derek moved, catching the light with each motion. St. Christopher. Protect us during travel. Glenn had worn that necklace through college, through his first job, through every major milestone of his adult life. He'd told me once, during one of our Sunday calls, that touching it made him feel connected to his father, that he'd never take it off because it was the last physical link to the man who'd raised him. And now it was on Derek's neck, at a wedding, casual as a fashion accessory. My vision narrowed. The sounds of the reception faded to white noise. I stood up, my chair scraped against the floor loud enough that people turned to look, and I walked across that dance floor like I was underwater. Derek saw me coming. His smile faltered. He knew. In that split second before I reached him, I saw the guilt flash across his face, and I knew. Where did you get that necklace? My voice came out stronger than I'd heard it in weeks. Derek's hand went to his throat, fingers touching the medallion like he could hide it now that I'd seen. Aunt Carol gave it to me. She said, "That's Glenn's necklace, the one his father gave him, the one he never took off." The words were falling out of me now, faster, sharper. People were staring. The music had stopped. Carol was pushing through the crowd, her face tight with something that wasn't concern. Derek looked between us, trapped. She said Glenn wanted me to have it, that it was in his things. But his voice cracked on the lie. He was a terrible liar, always had been. Even as a kid, he'd turn red when he tried to cover for his siblings. He was turning red now. "Derek, sweetie, it's okay," his wife murmured, touching his arm. But she looked confused too, her eyes darting between Derek's guilty face and my furious one. "What's going on?" "That's what I'd like to know," I said, my voice cutting through the murmuring crowd. "How did you get my dead son's necklace, Derek? The one he was supposedly wearing when he died in a car accident in Denver. Did they mail it back with his body? Did someone take it off his corpse?" The word corpse landed like a bomb. Stephanie gasped. Someone's champagne glass shattered. Derek's face went from red to white in an instant. Aunt Carol said. She said it was okay. She said he'd wanted me to have it. Carol reached us, her hand closing around my arm with surprising strength. "Maggie, let's not make a scene. Derek's right. Glenn wanted—" But I yanked my arm away. The fog that had surrounded me for 3 weeks was burning off, and underneath it was something sharp and clear and furious. "How did you get Glenn's necklace if he died in a car accident in Denver 3 weeks ago? Did they mail it with his body? Did you pull it off him at the morgue?" My voice was rising. Stephanie was crying. Derek looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Carol's face did something I'd never seen before. It closed, like a door slamming. "You're confused, Maggie. This is exactly why we've been worried about you. The stress of Glenn's death has—" But I cut her off. "Stop. Stop lying to me. Where is my son?" The question hung in the air. Around us, the wedding guests had gone completely silent. Carol's husband, my brother-in-law Tom, was trying to intervene, but I didn't take my eyes off my sister. "Tell me where my son is, or I swear to God, Carol." He's in Portland. The voice came from behind me. I turned. Derek's mother, Carol's ex-sister-in-law, Linda, was standing there holding a glass of champagne like it was a weapon. Your son is alive and well and living in Portland, Oregon, Maggie. Has been for the last 2 years. The champagne glass shattered when Carol threw it at the floor. That's when security got involved. That's when everything exploded. That's when my nephew's wedding turned into the worst family reunion in history. But I didn't care. Glenn was alive. My son was alive. The security guards, 2 large men in black suits who looked distinctly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of them, tried to calm the situation. One of them, a younger guy with sympathetic eyes, touched my elbow gently. "Ma'am, maybe we should step outside where it's quieter?" But I couldn't move. My legs had gone weak. Linda appeared at my other side, steadying me. "Come on, Maggie. Let's get you out of here." She shot Carol a look of pure venom. "You stay the hell away from her." Carol's mouth opened and closed like a fish. Tom was trying to pull her back, murmuring something about not making it worse. Stephanie was sobbing in her new husband's arms, her perfect wedding day destroyed. Derek stood frozen, one hand still touching the necklace, looking like he might vomit. The wedding guests were a sea of shocked faces, phones already out, recording what would become the most scandalous family moment in our history. Linda took me outside, away from the chaos. We sat on a bench in the country club's garden while inside, the wedding reception imploded. She told me everything. How Carol had been systematically cutting Glenn out of my life for over a year. How she'd changed my phone number and given Glenn a fake one, telling him I'd asked for space. How she'd intercepted his letters, his emails, his attempts to visit. How she'd finally told him I'd had a breakdown and wanted nothing to do with him. That contact would only make it worse. And Glenn, my sweet, trusting son, had believed her because why would his aunt lie about something like that? As Linda talked, I felt my understanding of the last year shift and rearrange itself. All those shortened phone calls with Glenn. They hadn't been from Glenn at all. Carol had hired someone to impersonate him, or maybe she'd used recordings, snippets of old conversations to make me believe we were still talking. Every unknown number call had been part of the deception. Every time I'd felt brushed off or dismissed by my son, it hadn't been him at all. It had been Carol, maintaining the illusion while she cut him out of my life entirely. "She convinced him you had early-onset Alzheimer's," Linda said, and I could hear the anger in her voice. "Told him you'd been diagnosed and that you'd specifically requested he stay away because you didn't want him to see you decline." She showed him doctor's notes. Forged, obviously. All of it forged. "I only found out because Derek let it slip last month. He thought I knew. He thought everyone knew Glenn was alive except you." She looked at me with something like pity. "Carol has power of attorney over you, doesn't she?" I nodded. "She's been selling off your assets, Maggie. Slowly, carefully. Legal enough that by the time anyone noticed, she'd be able to claim you were incompetent and she was just managing your affairs." The garden was cool and quiet, a stark contrast to the chaos inside. I could hear music starting up again. Someone had decided to try to salvage the reception. But out here, it was just Linda and me, and the truth spreading between us like poison, or maybe like antidote. Because for the first time in 3 weeks, my head felt clear. "Portland," I said, testing the word. "He's really in Portland?" "Really, truly," Linda confirmed. "Working for some tech startup. He's doing well from what Derek let slip. Has a girlfriend even. Your son is alive and happy and completely unaware that you think he's dead." A laugh bubbled up in my throat, inappropriate and slightly hysterical. "I mourned him. I planned his funeral. I signed over my entire life because I thought I'd lost the only thing that mattered." Linda's hand found mine on the bench. "I know. And Carol is going to pay for what she's done. I promise you that." The sacred line. That's what my therapist would later call it. The moment when you finally stop accepting the unacceptable. Mine happened on a bench in a country club garden while my nephew's wedding fell apart 50 feet away. I felt something in my chest crack open, and it wasn't grief anymore. It was rage. Pure, clarifying rage. My body knew before my mind did. My hands were shaking. My jaw was clenched so tight I thought my teeth would crack. This was my collapse symbol. Not tears, not surrender, but fury. Inside I could hear raised voices. Carol's mostly, high-pitched and defensive. Tom trying to calm her down. Stephanie still crying. The DJ had given up on the music. This was supposed to be one of the happiest days of Stephanie's life, and I felt a pang of guilt for ruining it. But then I remembered the necklace around Derek's neck, remembered 3 weeks of manufactured grief, remembered signing away my autonomy while Carol smiled and called it protection. No, this wasn't my fault. This was Carol's, every bit of it. "We need to call Glenn," I said, my voice steadier than I expected. Right now, I need to hear his voice, his real voice. Linda nodded and pulled out her phone. "I have his number. Derek had it stored under a fake name, but I found it." She scrolled through her contacts, then paused. "Maggie, I need to warn you. He doesn't know any of this. About the fake death, about the funeral, about what Carol's done to you. As far as he knows, you had a mental breakdown and asked him to stay away. He's been respecting what he thought were your wishes. When you call, he's going to be confused." I took the phone from her hand. The number was there on the screen, a Portland area code. My finger hovered over the call button. What would I say? How do you tell your son you've been mourning him while he's been living his life, completely unaware? How do you explain that your own sister had orchestrated this nightmare? "Call him," Linda urged gently. "Whatever you say, however it comes out, just call him. He deserves to know the truth." I pressed the button. Linda drove me home that night. Carol tried to follow us. Tried to talk her way into my house, but Linda stood between us like a bouncer. "You're done," she told her. "Whatever you've been doing, it's over." Carol's face twisted into something ugly. "You have no idea what you're talking about. Maggie needs help, and I'm the only one." But I shut the door in her face. For the first time in months, I locked it. I stood there with my back against the wood, listening to her pound and yell, and I felt nothing but cold determination. The pounding continued for a full 10 minutes. Carol's voice rose and fell, cycling through emotions like she was trying to find the one that would make me open the door. First came concern. "Maggie, please, let me explain. You're confused. You're upset. Let me help you." Then came anger. "This is ridiculous. I'm your sister. After everything I've done for you, you're going to lock me out?" Then came desperation. "Please, Maggie, please. You don't understand what you're doing. You're not thinking clearly." But I was thinking clearly. For the first time in 3 weeks, my mind felt sharp and focused. Linda stood beside me in the hallway, her arms crossed, her expression grim. "She'll leave eventually," she said. "Bullies always do when they realize their tactics aren't working." She was right. After 10 minutes of pounding and pleading and threatening, Carol's voice went quiet. I heard her say something to Tom, couldn't make out the words, and then footsteps retreating down my front walk. A car door slammed, an engine started, and then she was gone. I slid down the door until I was sitting on the floor, my back against the wood. Linda sat down beside me. We didn't speak. We just sat there in my hallway while the enormity of what had happened washed over us both. My son was alive. My sister was a monster. My entire life for the past 3 weeks had been a lie. Where did you even begin to process something like that? Linda stayed with me that night and the next day, helping me piece together what had happened. We found the power of attorney documents, legal, notarized, signed by me in a moment of grief-induced stupidity. We found bank statements showing transfers I'd never authorized. We found a file on Carol's computer. Linda was good with technology in ways I'd never learned to be, containing notes about my supposed mental decline, photos of my messy house, recordings of conversations where I sounded confused. She'd been building a case to have me declared incompetent, and she'd been using my grief as a smokescreen to do it. Going through Carol's documentation was like watching a horror movie unfold in spreadsheet form. She'd been meticulous. There were dated photographs of my house in various states of disarray, dishes in the sink, unopened mail on the counter, my unmade bed visible through the bedroom door. Each photo was time-stamped and labeled, subject showing signs of self-neglect. She unable to maintain household. Declining standards of hygiene. Subject. She'd called me subject like I was a research project instead of her sister. There were voice recordings, too, snippets of our conversations where I sounded confused or upset. Linda played one, and I heard my own voice, thick and slurred. I don't remember. Did I already tell you this? I can't think straight. It was from the second week after the fake phone call about Glenn's death, when Carol had me on those heavy-duty sleeping pills. Of course I couldn't think straight. She'd been drugging me. But in the recording, without context, I just sounded like a woman losing her grip on reality. "This is damning," Linda said, scrolling through the files. If she'd presented this to a court, along with the power of attorney and testimony from family members, Maggie, she could have had you declared incompetent. She was building an airtight case. But she'd also documented her own crimes. There were emails to Tom discussing which of my assets to liquidate first. "The investment portfolio is worth more, but moving it might raise flags," Carol had written. "Better to start with the savings account and the CD. We can say we're repositioning her assets for her own protection." Repositioning. Protection. The language was clinical, detached, like she was managing a stranger's money, not stealing from her sister. There was even a draft petition for guardianship, dated 2 weeks in the future. Carol had been planning to file it right after the funeral, while I was still deep in manufactured grief and medication-induced fog. She'd have presented her evidence, the photos, the recordings, the testimony of family members she'd primed to believe I was declining, and a judge likely would have granted it. I'd have lost legal control of my own life, become a ward of the woman who'd orchestrated my destruction, and it would have been perfectly legal. Have you ever doubted your own sanity? Have you ever looked at evidence of your own life and wondered if maybe everyone else was right and you were the one who was wrong? That's where Carol had me. She'd made me question every memory, every perception, every instinct. But seeing it laid out like that, black and white, numbers and dates and documented lies, it burned away the last of the fog. I wasn't crazy. I was being systematically abused by someone I'd trusted more than anyone, except Glenn. Research shows that family members commit about 90% of elder abuse cases. My own sister had made me part of that statistic. Linda helped me find a lawyer, a good one, the kind who'd seen cases like mine before. His name was Marcus Torres, 50-something, with gray in his beard and eyes that had seen every trick in the book. He listened to my story without interrupting, took notes in precise handwriting, and when I finished, he leaned back in his chair and said, "You're not the first. You won't be the last. But you're going to be one of the ones who fights back." Marcus's office was in downtown Phoenix, in one of those old buildings where the AC struggles and the elevator groans, but the character makes up for the lack of modern amenities. His desk was organized chaos, stacks of files, legal pads covered in notes, a coffee mug that proclaimed "World's Okayest Lawyer" in faded letters. He was nothing like the slick attorneys you see on TV, and somehow that made me trust him more. "Elder financial abuse," he said, flipping through the documents Linda and I had brought. "It's more common than people think, and it's a bitch to prosecute. Most victims don't realize what's happening until it's too late, or they're too ashamed to come forward, or they don't think anyone will believe them." He looked up at me. "You have something most victims don't: documentation. Your sister was so confident in her control over you that she wrote everything down, That's going to save you. He told me that getting the power of attorney revoked would be tricky since I'd signed it of my own free will. But the fraud, the forged documents, the financial manipulation, that was criminal. If we could prove it. And we could prove it because Carol had been thorough. Too thorough. She'd documented everything, thinking she'd need it to show I was incompetent. Instead, it showed her crimes in meticulous detail. "Here's what we're going to do," Marcus said, leaning forward with his elbows on the desk. "First, we establish that you're of sound mind. I'm going to send you to a geriatric psychiatrist, not one Carol has any connection to, for a full evaluation. We get it documented that you're mentally competent, that you're not suffering from Alzheimer's or dementia or any cognitive decline. That pulls the rug out from under her incompetency case." I nodded, relieved that someone was finally giving me a concrete plan. "Second, we file a police report. What your sister did, the forged documents, the fake death notification, the financial transfers without authorization, those are crimes, multiple crimes. We get law enforcement involved immediately. Third, we get a restraining order keeping Carol away from you while we sort this out. And fourth, we create a new power of attorney that supersedes the old one, with your son as your designated agent. That strips Carol of any legal authority she gained through the document you signed." It sounded so clear, so straightforward when he laid it out like that. But I knew it wouldn't be simple. Carol wouldn't go quietly. She'd fight. She'd manipulate. She'd try to paint me as unstable and vindictive. She'd invested too much into this scheme to surrender without a battle. "One more thing," Marcus said, his expression growing serious. "You need to prepare yourself for what's coming. When we move against Carol, it's going to get ugly. She'll say things about you, about Glenn, about your mental state. She'll try to make you the villain. Family members will take sides. Some of them will believe her version of events. This is going to hurt, Mrs. Patterson. Are you ready for that?" I thought about the necklace around Derek's neck. I thought about 3 weeks of grieving a son who wasn't dead. I thought about the medications that left me foggy, the isolation, the systematic destruction of my autonomy. "Yes," I said, "I'm ready." The first thing we did was restore contact with Glenn. Marcus helped me file a restraining order against Carol. Temporary. Just enough to keep her away while we sorted things out. Then Linda gave me Glenn's real number. My hands shook so badly I had to dial 3 times. It rang once, twice. Then his voice, his actual voice, not a memory or a recording, but him, alive, saying, "Hello?" I couldn't speak. My throat had closed up. "Hello? Who is this?" I heard suspicion in his tone, wariness. What had Carol told him about me? Glenn. Just his name, that's all I could manage. Silence on the other end. Then, barely audible. "Mom?" The word broke something in me. I was crying now, ugly crying, the kind where you can't breathe. "Mom, is that really you? I thought, Aunt Carol said you didn't want to talk to me. She said you were sick and I'd make it worse. She said," I cut him off. "She lied, baby. She lied about everything. You're alive. You're alive, and I thought you were dead, and she lied about all of it." More silence. Then, "What? Mom, what are you talking about? Who died?" It took 2 hours on the phone to explain it all. Glenn's voice cycled through disbelief, confusion, rage, and back to disbelief. He'd been living in Portland, working for a tech startup, dating someone, building a life while thinking his mother had abandoned him. Carol had been so careful. She'd used my grief from losing my husband, Glenn's father, years ago to convince Glenn I was having a mental health crisis. She'd shown him fake medical records. She'd even had someone call him pretending to be my psychiatrist. The level of planning, of deception, was staggering. "I should have questioned it more," Glenn kept saying. "I should have tried harder to reach you." But I told him what I'd learned from Marcus, what I was learning from this whole nightmare, that victims of manipulation aren't stupid. They're trusting. They believe the people they love wouldn't hurt them. And when those people do hurt them, they blame themselves for not seeing it coming. Glenn flew out 2 days later. The moment I saw him walking through Sky Harbor Airport, very much alive, wearing that same leather jacket he'd had since college, I thought my heart would stop. We held each other in the middle of baggage claim while strangers walked around us, and neither of us cared. He was real. He was here. He was mine again. The drive home from the airport was surreal. Glenn sat in my passenger seat, looking exactly as I remembered, but also different. Older, maybe, or just real in a way that my grief-addled memories hadn't been. He kept reaching over to touch my hand, like he needed to confirm I was actually there. We didn't talk much. What do you say when you've been raised from the dead in someone's mind? When you've discovered your family tried to erase you from your mother's life? I live here now, I said as we pulled into my driveway. Glenn looked at the house, the same house he'd grown up in, with the peeling paint and the desert landscaping and the porch swing his father had installed 20 years ago. Same place, he said softly. It looks exactly the same. It's not the same, I said. Nothing is, but we'll figure it out. We went inside, and I made coffee while Glenn walked through the rooms like a ghost touring his old life. He paused at the photos on the mantel, pictures of him as a child, as a teenager, his high school graduation photo. She told me you'd taken these down, he said. Aunt Carol, she said you couldn't bear to look at pictures of me anymore because of your condition. She said seeing my face made you agitated. Another lie. Another manipulation designed to keep us apart. I felt the rage surge again, hot and sharp. She told me a lot of things that weren't true, I said. And I'm going to make sure she answers for every single one. With Glenn back and Linda's support, I started planning my exit from Carol's control quietly. Marcus advised me not to confront Carol directly yet. We needed everything documented, every piece of evidence secured before we made a move. So I pretended. I kept up the charade of the confused, grieving mother. I let Carol visit, let her condescend to me, let her check my pill bottles and reorganize my kitchen while I memorized every word she said. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done. Looking at her face and knowing what she'd stolen from me while she smiled and called me sweetie, like I was a child. Glenn stayed hidden during Carol's visits, sequestered in the guest room with the door closed. It was absurd, hiding my alive son in my own house while his would-be killer checked my medication compliance. But Marcus had been clear. We needed Carol to believe her plan was still working. Any hint that I knew the truth, that Glenn was back, would send her into damage control mode. She'd destroy evidence, manufacture new lies, possibly even escalate. So I played along. How are you feeling today, Maggie? Carol would ask, that patient smile fixed on her face. She'd taken to coming by every other day, always with some excuse, bringing groceries, checking on my medication schedule, making sure I was eating enough. Really, I knew now she was monitoring me, making sure I stayed compliant, foggy, dependent. Tired, I'd say, which was true. Maintaining the pretense was exhausting. I can't seem to get my energy back. That's normal for grief, she'd assure me, patting my hand. It takes time. You're doing so well, considering everything. Considering that you killed my son, I'd think but not say. Considering that you've stolen my money and my dignity and nearly my sanity. I'm going to make you some tea, she'd continue. It'll help you relax. I'd learned to pour that tea down the sink when she wasn't looking. I'd stopped taking the pills she brought, instead flushing them and filling the bottles with vitamins that looked similar. Day by day, the fog lifted. My mind sharpened. And I watched my sister with new eyes, seeing the calculation behind every gesture of care, the manipulation behind every expression of concern. We closed every legal loophole. Marcus helped me create a new power of attorney that superseded the old one, this time with Glenn as my agent and specific provisions preventing Carol from making any decisions about my health, finances, or well-being. We documented every fraudulent transaction. We gathered the forged medical records, the manipulated bank statements, the recordings of Carol coaching Derek on what to say about Glenn's death. We even found emails between Carol and her husband discussing how much they could extract from my estate before anyone noticed. The word inheritance appeared 17 times. They'd been planning this for years. One email in particular stuck with me. It was from Carol to Tom, dated 6 months before the fake death notification. "Maggie's been talking about updating her will," Carol had written, "making Glenn the sole beneficiary with me as a backup. We need to move faster. If she gets everything properly documented with a lawyer I don't control, it's over. The window is closing." Tom's response was equally chilling. "What about the Alzheimer's angle? Your mom had it. It's genetic. Easy to suggest Maggie's showing early signs." And Carol's reply, "Already started. She's forgetting things. I'm making sure of it. Give me 6 months and I'll have her convinced she can't manage without me." They'd planned it. They'd sat in their perfect beige house in their gated community and planned how to steal my life. They'd set a timeline. They'd strategized. And they'd nearly succeeded. The confrontation came at a place and time of my choosing. Carol had organized a family reunion. Ironic, considering she'd been systematically destroying our family for her own profit, at her house in Scottsdale. Everyone would be there. The cousins, the in-laws, the extended family who'd watched me grieve a son who wasn't dead and done nothing because they believed Carol's lies about my declining mental state. I asked Glenn to stay away for this. I needed to do it myself. But Linda came with me, and Marcus waited in his car outside just in case. Carol's house was exactly as I remembered it. Pristine, magazine perfect. Decorated in shades of cream and gold that probably cost more than most people's cars. Everyone was gathered in the backyard around the pool, drinking wine and eating catered food. Carol saw me arrive and her smile was so warm, so genuinely pleased, that for a second I almost doubted everything. Almost. "Maggie, I'm so glad you came. We were just talking about you." "I bet you were," I smiled back. "Carol, could you gather everyone? I have something to say." She looked momentarily uncertain, but her need to control won out. She called everyone to attention, tapping her wine glass like this was a toast. 23 people turned to look at me. I stood there in my simple dress with Linda beside me, and I thought about all the times I'd stood in front of a classroom of 4th graders, commanding their attention. This wasn't so different, except the lesson today was going to hurt. "Thank you all for coming," I started. "I know Carol told you this was a family reunion to help me feel less isolated after Glenn's death." I paused. Let that word hang in the air. Death. "The thing is, Glenn isn't dead. He never was. He's alive and well in Portland, Oregon, and he'll be happy to confirm that for anyone who wants to call him." The silence was absolute. You could have heard a pin drop into the pool. Carol's face went white. "Maggie, what are you—" But I kept talking. "For the past 6 months, my sister has been systematically stealing from me. She forged medical documents claiming I had Alzheimer's. She manipulated me into signing a power of attorney and then used it to drain my accounts. She cut my son out of my life and told him I didn't want to see him anymore. And she lied to all of you about my mental state to keep you from questioning any of it." I pulled out the folder Marcus had prepared. I have bank statements showing Carol transferred over $200,000 from my accounts to hers. I have emails between her and Tom discussing how to maximize the assets before anyone caught on. I have recordings of her coaching Derek on maintaining the lie about Glenn's death. And I have a lawyer in the car outside who's very interested in discussing this with the police. The folder hit the patio table with a slap that echoed off the pool water. Carol lunged for it, but Linda was faster. She held it out of reach while Carol's perfect mask finally cracked. "You ungrateful—" Carol's voice was shaking. "Everything I did to protect you. You were falling apart. You couldn't manage your own life. Someone had to—" But I cut her off. A betrayal this deep doesn't heal. It scars over. "You had choices at every step, Carol. You could have helped me grieve. You could have supported me. Instead, you saw an opportunity, And you took it. You stole from me. You lied to my son. You tried to have me declared incompetent so you could take everything I'd worked my entire life to build. And you did it while pretending to care about me. The family was in chaos. Some of them were crying. Some were yelling. Carol's husband, Tom, tried to grab the folder, but Linda held firm. Derek was apologizing, his wife holding him back as he sobbed about the necklace, about not knowing, about being sorry. And Carol? She just stood there, her perfect life crumbling around her, and for the first time I saw her as she really was. Not my strong, organized sister. Just a woman who'd gambled everything on her sister being too broken to fight back. She'd gambled wrong. I didn't stay for the aftermath. Linda and I walked out, folder in hand, and got into Marcus's car. He drove us to the police station where we filed a formal complaint. Carol was arrested 3 days later. The charges included fraud, forgery, financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, and identity theft. The prosecutor told me that these cases rarely go to court because victims don't come forward or because the abuse is too subtle to prove. But Carol had been thorough. Her thoroughness became her downfall. Every forged document, every manipulated transaction, every lie she'd told was documented somewhere. She'd been so confident in her control over me that she'd never covered her tracks properly. The trial took 8 months. Carol hired expensive lawyers who tried every angle, claiming I was confused, that I'd given her permission, that this was all a misunderstanding between sisters. But the evidence was overwhelming. Glenn testified. Linda testified. Marcus presented our documentation like a prosecutor on a crime show, methodical and devastating. The jury deliberated for 6 hours, guilty on all counts. Carol was sentenced to 4 years in prison and ordered to pay full restitution plus damages. She lost her house, her savings, her reputation. The family fractured. Some of them still contact me. Some of them never want to hear my name again because I destroyed Carol's life. As if she hadn't tried to destroy mine first. But here's what matters. She faced consequences. Real, legal, public consequences. The judge said something during sentencing that stuck with me. Elder abuse thrives in silence and shame, Mrs. Patterson's willingness to come forward may prevent this defendant from victimizing others. Carol's husband divorced her 6 months into her sentence. Derek changed his name. Stephanie won't speak to either of them. The family Carol had claimed to protect while robbing me blind, it shattered like glass. I won't lie and say justice tasted sweet. Mostly it tasted like ash and grief for what we could have been as sisters. But it tasted like freedom too. Freedom from her control, from her lies, from wondering if I was crazy. The courts reinstated full control of my finances. Marcus helped me recover about 60% of what Carol had stolen. The rest had been spent on her lifestyle, her gated community, her pretense of perfection. But I got enough back. More than that. I got myself back. 3 months after the trial ended, I was standing in my kitchen making coffee when I heard a knock at the door. For a second, my body tensed, old habits from months of Carol showing up unannounced. But it was Glenn, letting himself in with the key I'd given him when he moved back to Phoenix. He'd transferred jobs, found an apartment 20 minutes away, started rebuilding the relationship Carol had tried to destroy. "Morning, Mom," he said, kissing my cheek. "You ready?" We were going to breakfast, just a regular Saturday morning breakfast at the diner on McDowell Road that made the best pancakes in the city. Nothing special. Everything special. Glenn poured himself coffee from my pot, added too much sugar like he always had, and we talked about normal things. His work, his girlfriend who I'd met last week and liked immediately. My garden that was finally recovering from months of neglect. Normal. It felt like the most precious thing in the world. "You know what I was thinking about?" Glenn said as we drove to the diner. "That necklace, the one Derek was wearing at the wedding." I touched my throat reflexively. I wore it now. Glenn had given it back to me after the trial. "What about it?" He was quiet for a moment. "If he hadn't been wearing it that night, we might never have figured it out," Carol might have gotten away with all of it. Isn't that crazy? One necklace changed everything. He was right. One visible lie had unraveled all the others. One piece of evidence I recognized had broken through the fog of grief and manipulation. I thought about all the things that had to align for me to see the truth. The wedding invitation, Derek's poor judgment in wearing Glenn's necklace, Linda being there to confirm what I suspected. Any one of those things could have gone differently. Carol was probably one successful manipulation away from having me declared incompetent. One more forged document from taking everything. But life doesn't deal in what-ifs. It deals in what is. And what is was that I'd seen the necklace, asked the questions, found the truth, and fought back. The diner was crowded with Saturday morning regulars. We waited for a booth, and while we did, an older woman in line behind us leaned over and said, "Excuse me, are you Margaret Patterson? I saw you on the news during that trial." My stomach tightened. Even now, the publicity made me uncomfortable, but she smiled, gentle and genuine. "I just wanted to say thank you. My daughter-in-law had been doing something similar to my husband's mother, and seeing your case gave us the courage to investigate. We stopped her before she could do real damage. You saved my mother-in-law's independence, so thank you." I didn't know what to say. Glenn squeezed my hand. The woman walked away, and we got our booth, and I ordered pancakes I could barely taste because I was crying into my coffee. Good crying this time. Healing crying. The kind that washes things clean instead of drowning you. I'd spent so long thinking of myself as a victim, and I had been. But maybe I was also something else. A survivor, a warning, a precedent. Other families would see Carol's conviction and know that elder abuse has consequences. Other victims would see my story and know they weren't crazy, weren't weak, weren't powerless. Before I wrap up my story, I want to share something important I learned through all of this, something I think could help someone listening right now. Financial abuse of the elderly is one of the most underreported crimes in America. Estimates suggest that for every case reported to authorities, roughly 24 cases go unreported. Think about that. 24 families out of 25 suffering in silence, either because the victim doesn't realize what's happening or because they're too ashamed to come forward. I was almost one of those silent statistics. Here's what I learned about protecting yourself or your loved ones from financial abuse. First, never sign a power of attorney when you're in crisis. Grief, illness, stress. These are the moments when predators strike because your judgment is compromised. If someone insists you need to sign legal documents right away or for your own good, that's a red flag. A legitimate need for power of attorney can wait until you've consulted with your own lawyer, not the one your family member conveniently brings to your door. Second, maintain your own financial accounts and regularly review your statements. Even if you have help managing your money, you should see where every dollar goes. Online banking makes this easier than ever. If someone is pressuring you to simplify by giving them complete control, ask yourself why. Real help doesn't require taking away your autonomy. Third, stay connected to people outside your immediate family. Carol isolated me systematically, cutting me off from friends and neighbors who might have questioned the changes in my life. Isolation is a weapon. Fight it. Keep your own phone, keep your own email, keep your own connections. Fourth, document everything, especially if you start to feel uneasy. I wish I'd kept a journal during those months. I wish I'd saved Carol's texts and emails instead of deleting them because they made me feel bad. Those communications would have been evidence earlier. Your instincts are telling you something is wrong for a reason. Preserve the proof. And fifth, know that it's never too late to fight back. Even after I'd signed away power of attorney, even after thousands of dollars were gone, even after being declared mentally incompetent seemed inevitable, I still won. Because the law is on your side if you're willing to use it. If you're watching this and something about my story resonates uncomfortably, please don't ignore that feeling. Look at your bank accounts. Question the helpful family member who's always pushing you to sign things. Talk to a lawyer independently. Most offer free consultations. You're not being paranoid, you're being smart. And if you know someone who's being isolated or financially controlled by a family member, say something. Ask questions. Offer to go with them to a lawyer. You might be the person who breaks the spell before real damage is done, like that woman in the diner whose mother-in-law I'll never meet, but somehow helped. The hard truth is that we want to believe our families will protect us. We're raised with this myth of blood being thicker than water, of family loyalty being sacred. But family is just people, and people are capable of terrible things when money and power are involved. Trust your family, sure, but verify. Love your family, absolutely, but protect yourself. Because the people who truly love you won't ask you to surrender your autonomy as proof of that love. They won't need you to be helpless to feel needed. Real love empowers. It doesn't diminish. I'm living proof that you can come back from this. It's been a year since Carol's conviction. I've rebuilt my savings, repaired my credit, reclaimed my life. I write now, working on a book about my experience because I think it might help others recognize the warning signs I missed. Glenn and I talk every day, sometimes twice. We have Sunday dinners together. We're rebuilding trust that Carol shattered, and it's slow work, but it's good work. He apologized so many times for believing her lies, and I've told him just as many times that the fault lies with Carol, not with him for being manipulated by someone he trusted. I've reconnected with old friends I'd lost touch with during Carol's campaign to isolate me. I've joined a support group for elder abuse survivors, and hearing their stories has been both heartbreaking and healing. We're not rare. We're not alone. We're just usually silent. But silence protects the abuser, not the victim. So I talk, I share, I warn. And sometimes, like with that woman in the diner, it makes a difference. My house feels like mine again. I repainted the living room a color Carol hated. Deep red, warm, and bold. I planted tomatoes in the backyard, even though I'm terrible at gardening, just because I can. I make my own decisions about my own life, and some of them are mistakes, and that's okay, because they're my mistakes to make. Agency, autonomy, freedom. These aren't abstract concepts anymore. They're the foundation I'm rebuilding on. Thank you for staying with me until the end of this. I know it's been a long journey, and if you've made it this far, it means something about my story connected with you. Maybe you've experienced something similar. Maybe you're worried about someone you love. Maybe you just needed to hear that fighting back is possible, even when it seems impossible. So let me ask you this, and I really want to know, what would you have done in my place? Would you have seen the warning signs earlier? Would you have confronted Carol at the wedding? Or would you have waited like I did to gather evidence? And here's the harder question. If you saw this happening to someone else, would you speak up? Tell me in the comments. I read everyone, and your perspectives help me understand my own story better. Sometimes you don't know how you'd react to betrayal until you're living it. And I'm still processing what I learned about myself through this nightmare. If this story resonated with you, if it made you think or feel or question something in your own life, please hit that like button. It helps more people find this video, and maybe someone needs to hear it today. Maybe someone is sitting in their living room right now signing a power of attorney they don't understand. And this story will make them pause. Maybe someone will recognize their own Carol and realize they're not crazy. That's why I share. Not for pity or attention, but because silence lets abusers win. And please subscribe to this channel if you haven't already. I share stories like this every week. Stories of betrayal and survival, of manipulation and recovery, of people who were pushed down and chose to stand back up. Real stories from real people who've lived through things nobody should have to endure but did anyway and came out the other side. You're not alone in your pain. Whatever you're going through, someone else has survived it and lived to tell the tale. Let those tales give you strength. Before you go, I want to recommend 2 other videos. If my story made you think about family dynamics and control, watch My Mother-in-Law Moved In and Tried to Replace Me. It's It's about how isolation and manipulation work in real time. And if you're struggling with trusting your own judgment after betrayal, I Thought I Was Crazy Until I Found the Cameras explores gaslighting in a way that might help you recognize it in your own life. Both are linked in the description. Both are stories that need to be heard. I'm in Phoenix, Arizona, and it's early morning here as I finish writing this. The light is coming through my kitchen window, catching on Glenn's St. Christopher medal around my neck. Wherever you are, whatever time you're listening to this, I hope you're safe. I hope you're surrounded by people who genuinely care about you. And if you're not, I hope you find the strength to change that, the way I finally did. It's never too late. You're never too old. You're never too beaten down. The moment you decide to fight back is the moment everything can change. Until the next story, take care of your heart. Protect your independence. Trust your instincts. And remember, family should lift you up, not tear you down. If they're doing the latter, they've forfeited the privilege of the title. You owe them nothing. You owe yourself everything. Thank you for listening.